I never thought I'd hear those words from him. Not after 40 years of marriage, not on our anniversary. But there they were, slicing through the air like a knife. "Mia, I never loved you." Reg's voice was cold, detached, as if he were discussing the weather instead of shattering my heart into pieces. We were sitting in the grand dining room of our Cape Cod estate, surrounded by crystal chandeliers and fine china that had always felt more like his trophies than mine. He didn't even look at me when he said it. His eyes stayed glued to the glass of scotch in his hand, swirling it lazily as though this moment meant nothing to him. The truth is, I should have seen it coming. Over the years, I'd convinced myself that love wasn't supposed to feel warm or tender. It was just practical. That's what Reg taught me anyway. He controlled everything. The money, the friends I could keep, even the clothes I wore. Yet despite all of that, I stayed. Maybe I hoped one day he'd soften, or maybe I was too scared to leave. Either way, hearing those words felt like confirmation of something I'd buried deep inside for decades. I was never enough for him. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that I had been planning my own exit strategy for years. And tonight, his cruel confession gave me permission to finally set it in motion. After dinner, I retreated to my study, a small, dimly lit room tucked away at the back of the house where Reg rarely ventured. It was my sanctuary, filled with books and mementos from a life I barely recognized anymore. Sitting at the desk, I opened the bottom drawer and pulled out a worn leather notebook. Inside were meticulous records of every transaction I'd made over the past 30 years. The ones Reg knew nothing about. Half of his inheritance, the fortune he inherited from his father's shipping empire, now sat safely tucked away in offshore accounts under aliases I'd created myself. It started innocently enough, or so I told myself. When Reg first brought me into his world, he trusted me implicitly, letting me handle some of the finances while he focused on expanding his business. Back then, I thought I was doing it for security, a little nest egg in case things went south. But as time passed and his indifference grew colder, the act became less about survival and more about power. Every transfer I made felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that he'd tried to erase. Now, staring at those numbers, I realized I wasn't just keeping secrets. I was holding the key to destroying him. And tonight, I decided he deserved to know exactly what I'd done. The next morning, I drove to Lila's place, a cozy cottage nestled among wildflowers just outside town. Lila and I had been friends since childhood, though lately we'd drifted apart. Seeing her again felt like stepping back in time, to a simpler version of myself before Reg took over my life. She greeted me with a tight hug, her sharp blue eyes immediately sensing something was wrong. Over tea I spilled everything. Reg's confession, the inheritance, the years of quiet rebellion. I expected her to gasp, to marvel at my audacity, but instead she frowned. "Mia," she said softly, "revenge might taste sweet, but it leaves a bitter aftertaste. Are you sure this is what you want?" Her words stung because I knew she was right. Revenge wouldn't undo the pain Reg had caused, nor would it bring back the years I'd lost. But part of me didn't care. For once I wanted to take control, not just of my future but of his too. So I smiled weakly and promised her I'd think twice before taking the next step. What I didn't tell her was that I'd already taken it. Later that week, fate, or perhaps karma, intervened. I was sipping coffee at a local cafe when a man slid into the seat across from me. He introduced himself as Caleb Monroe, Reg's estranged son from a previous marriage. I'd heard whispers about him over the years, but Reg refused to speak his name aloud. Caleb looked tired, his dark hair streaked with gray, but there was a fire in his hazel eyes that reminded me of someone who refused to stay down. He explained how Reg had abandoned him and his mother decades ago, leaving them penniless while building his empire. As he spoke, I saw myself reflected in his anger, and an opportunity began to form in my mind. "I know how much damage he's capable of," I said carefully, leaning closer. "But what if I told you there's a way to expose him? To make him pay for everything he's done?" Caleb hesitated, clearly skeptical of trusting anyone connected to Reg. Still, I could see the wheels turning in his head. By the end of our conversation, we'd struck a tentative alliance. Together, we'd dismantle the man who had ruined both our lives, one secret at a time. That night, lying awake in bed, memories flooded back unbidden. I remembered the early days of my marriage when Reg still pretended to care. Back then, he charmed everyone around him, including me. He wooed me with promises of adventure and luxury, painting pictures of a life I couldn't resist. But once the vows were exchanged, the mask slipped. Slowly but surely, he stripped away my independence until I became little more than an accessory to his success. The worst part? No one noticed. To the outside world, we were the perfect couple, hosting elegant parties and vacationing in exotic locations. Only I knew the truth, that behind closed doors I was suffocating. As the years dragged on, I learned to adapt. I studied Reg's habits, memorized his routines, and quietly gathered information. At first it was survival. Later it became a game. Each document I forged, each account I opened, gave me a sense of agency I hadn't felt in years. Looking back, I realize I wasn't just protecting myself, I was preparing for war. And now, with Caleb by my side, I finally had the ally I needed to strike. Reginald, or Reg as I called him in my head when I wanted to strip him of any dignity, wasn't stupid. He might have been cruel and self-absorbed, but he was sharp as a tack when it came to money. It didn't take long for him to notice the discrepancies in his financial records. At first he chalked it up to clerical errors or sloppy bookkeeping, but soon enough his paranoia kicked in. I could see it in the way he paced around the house late at night, muttering under his breath, scrolling through spreadsheets on his tablet. His eyes darted toward me more often than usual, like he was trying to gauge whether I knew something. Of course I played dumb. When he asked me if I'd accessed any of his files recently, I gave him my best wide-eyed innocent look. "Why would I touch your work stuff?" I said sweetly, sipping my tea. Inside though, I was buzzing with adrenaline. This was exactly what I wanted, to make him doubt everything. To let him feel the same uncertainty that had haunted me for decades. But even as I reveled in his unease, a small part of me worried. What if he figured it out? What if he found a way to trace the offshore accounts back to me? For now though, I reminded myself that I'd covered my tracks meticulously. If anyone could outsmart Reg Sterling, it was me. Lila cornered me the next day at the farmer's market. She grabbed my arm gently but firmly, steering me away from the bustling stalls of fresh produce and flowers. Her face was pinched with concern, her voice low and urgent. "Mia, you're playing with fire," she hissed. "You think this revenge is going to fix things, but it won't. All it's going to do is burn you alive." I tried to brush her off, telling her she didn't understand, but she cut me off. "Oh, I understand perfectly. You've spent 40 years letting that man walk all over you and now you want to hit back. But what happens after? Do you really think destroying him will make you happy?" Her words stung because they hit too close to home. Deep down, I knew she was right. Revenge wasn't going to magically erase the pain Reg had caused. But I couldn't stop now, not when I was so close to seeing him crumble. So instead of answering, I forced a smile and changed the subject. "Have you tried those honey tarts yet?" I asked brightly, pretending everything was fine. Lila sighed and shook her head, but she let it drop, for now. As we walked away, I felt a pang of guilt. Still, I pushed it aside. There would be time for regret later. Right now, I had a plan to execute. Caleb showed up at my doorstep 2 days later, unannounced but not unwelcome. He carried a leather satchel slung over his shoulder, its contents spilling out onto my kitchen table. Documents, photos, bank statements, all incriminating evidence of Reg's shady dealings over the years. "I did some digging," he explained, his voice tinged with pride. "Turns out Dad isn't just a lousy human being, he's also a crook. Tax evasion, bribes, illegal offshore accounts. You name it, he's done it." I stared at the pile of papers, my heart racing. This was better than I'd hoped for. Together we mapped out our strategy. Caleb would leak the information to the press while I handled the personal blow. I planned to confront Reg publicly, at one of his fancy charity galas no less, and expose not only his crimes but also the truth about the inheritance I'd stolen. Caleb grinned when I told him my plan. "You're ruthless," he said approvingly. "I like it." Part of me felt guilty for dragging him into this mess, but another part was grateful. With Caleb on my side, I finally felt like I wasn't fighting alone. Reg must have sensed something was coming because he struck first. One morning I woke up to find all our joint accounts frozen. My credit cards were declined, my checks bounced, and the staff who worked for us suddenly disappeared without explanation. Clearly Reg was trying to punish me, to remind me that he still held the reins. But what he didn't realize was that I didn't need his money anymore. The funds I'd squirreled away over the years were more than enough to sustain me, and then some. Still, his move rattled me. It was a reminder of how far he'd go to maintain control. That evening I sat in my study, staring at the laptop screen as I transferred another round of donations to various charities. Each transaction felt like a middle finger aimed directly at Reg. Yet, despite my bravado, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Reg wasn't the type to give up easily. Whatever he had planned next, I knew it wouldn't be pretty. The gala arrived sooner than I expected, and I dressed carefully for the occasion. A sleek black gown that hugged my curves and a string of pearls Reg had once bought me, purely for show of course. As I descended the staircase, I caught glimpses of myself in the mirrors lining the hall. For the first time in years I looked confident, powerful. Tonight I would reclaim my dignity, and maybe even a piece of my soul. When the speeches began, I waited patiently for my moment. Then as Reg stood at the podium basking in applause, I stepped forward. "There's something everyone here should know," I announced, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. The room fell silent as I laid bare the truth. About the inheritance, about the offshore accounts, about the man they thought they knew. Reg's face turned white with rage, but I didn't care. For the first time in decades I felt free. The morning after the gala I woke up to a strange kind of silence. The house felt emptier than usual. Not because Reg was gone, he'd stormed out during my speech and hadn't returned, but because the weight of his presence had finally lifted. For 40 years his shadow loomed over every corner of this estate, dictating how I lived, what I wore, who I spoke to. Now it was just me, and the unfamiliar freedom terrified me as much as it thrilled me. I decided to leave. Not immediately, but soon. This gilded cage no longer suited me. I packed a few essentials into a suitcase and booked a room at a modest inn by the sea. It wasn't luxurious like our home, but it was mine. Paid for with money I'd earned, not inherited or stolen. Sitting on the edge of the creaky bed that first night, I stared out the window at the waves crashing against the shore. I realized I didn't know who I was anymore. Amelia Sterling, the woman who tolerated Reg's cruelty, who schemed in secret, felt like a stranger now. But maybe that was okay. Maybe starting over meant becoming someone new. Reg's fall from grace happened faster than even I anticipated. Within days, the media exploded with stories about his corruption, fueled by Caleb's leaks and my public confession. Business partners distanced themselves, friends stopped answering his calls, and charities scrambled to distance their names from his tainted reputation. He tried to fight back, issuing denials and threats, but no one believed him anymore. Even his lawyers seemed reluctant to defend him, citing conflicts of interest and other vague excuses. One afternoon Lila called me with an update. She'd heard through mutual acquaintances that Reg was holed up in his study, drinking heavily and ranting about betrayal. Apparently he couldn't understand why everyone had turned against him so quickly. "He's losing his mind," she said, her tone equal parts pity and disgust. Part of me wanted to feel sorry for him, to remember the man I once thought I loved, but I couldn't muster any sympathy. This was the life he'd chosen. Isolation, arrogance, destruction. If anything, I felt vindicated. Justice might be messy, but it was still justice. Caleb visited me a week later, bringing coffee and croissants from a local bakery. We sat on the porch of my rented cottage, watching seagulls wheel overhead as we talked strategy. He updated me on his efforts to dismantle Reg's remaining assets, including legal battles to reclaim funds siphoned off through illegal schemes. "It's going to take time," he admitted, "but we're making progress." His enthusiasm was contagious, and for the first time in years I felt hopeful, not just for myself but for others who might benefit from taking Reg down. As we chatted, Caleb mentioned something unexpected. He'd started volunteering at a shelter for domestic abuse survivors. "After everything you told me about your marriage," he said quietly, "I wanted to do something meaningful. To help people who've been where you were." Tears pricked my eyes as I thanked him, overwhelmed by his kindness. In that moment I realized Caleb wasn't just an ally, he was family. Blood didn't define us, shared pain and resilience did. And for the first time in decades I felt like I belonged somewhere. Desperate and cornered, Reg made one last attempt to salvage his empire, or at least punish me. He filed a lawsuit accusing me of embezzlement, fraud and theft. The headlines screamed again, painting me as a conniving gold digger who'd manipulated him for years. At first panic bubbled inside me. What if people believed him? What if all my careful planning unraveled under scrutiny? But then I remembered, I'd covered my tracks too well. Every alias, every transaction, Every document was designed to withstand investigation. The case dragged on for months, but eventually the judge dismissed it due to lack of evidence. Reg's accusations crumbled under cross-examination, leaving him looking foolish and bitter. By the time the verdict came in, most of his former allies had already written him off entirely. As I left the courthouse that day, reporters shouting questions and cameras flashing around me, I allowed myself a small smile. This victory wasn't just for me. It was for every woman who'd ever been silenced, controlled, or underestimated by men like Reg. A few weeks later, Caleb invited me to visit his family in Europe. He'd reconnected with his mother, who lived in a picturesque village in Provence, and they both wanted to meet me. "You're part of this now," he said earnestly. "We owe you everything." I appreciated the gesture truly, but I declined. My roots were here in Cape Cod among the wildflowers and salty air. Besides, I'd begun working on a project of my own, a foundation to support women escaping abusive relationships. Using the remaining funds from Reg's inheritance, I purchased a large property near town and converted it into a safe haven complete with counseling services, job training programs, and housing. Caleb understood my decision, though he teased me about being stubborn. Before he left for France, he hugged me tightly and promised to stay in touch. "You're stronger than anyone I know," he whispered. "Don't forget that." As I watched him drive away, I felt a pang of sadness, but also pride. For the first time in my life, I'd built something real, something lasting. And it had nothing to do with Reg. Life settled into a quiet rhythm after that. Days blurred together as I threw myself into running the foundation, mentoring young women, and rebuilding connections with old friends like Lila. Yet despite the fulfillment I found in these pursuits, loneliness crept in occasionally. Nights were hardest. The quiet reminded me of all the years I'd spent alone, even when surrounded by people. Sometimes I wondered if revenge had been worth the cost, if trading one kind of emptiness for another was really progress. But then I'd think about the women whose lives I'd touched, the ones who hugged me tearfully and called me their hero. They reminded me that healing wasn't linear, that scars could become symbols of strength. One evening, as I walked along the beach, I picked up a smooth stone and skipped it across the water. Watching it bounce and sink, I smiled faintly. Maybe forgiveness wasn't about forgetting, it was about moving forward. And for the first time in decades, I felt ready to try. It started with fatigue, just a little more tired than usual, nothing alarming. But then came the dizziness, the shortness of breath, and the persistent ache in my chest that no amount of rest could ease. I ignored it at first, chalking it up to stress or age. After all, I was 65. My body had earned the right to slow down. But when I collapsed while giving a speech at the Foundation's annual fundraiser, even I couldn't deny something was wrong. The diagnosis hit me like a freight train: stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The doctor used words like aggressive and terminal, his voice calm but firm. There was treatment available, of course, chemotherapy, radiation, but he didn't sugarcoat the prognosis. Months, maybe a year if I was lucky. Sitting in that sterile hospital room staring at the floor tiles, I felt numb. This wasn't supposed to happen now. Not when I'd finally found purpose, not when I'd worked so hard to reclaim my life. Lila sat beside me, holding my hand tightly, her face pale with shock. "You're going to fight this," she said fiercely, as though sheer willpower could rewrite fate. But deep down I knew better. Some battles aren't meant to be won, they're meant to teach us how to let go. A few weeks later, an unexpected visitor arrived at my cottage. It was Reg, or rather what remained of him. Gone was the sharp-suited businessman who once commanded rooms with his presence. In his place stood a frail, hollow-eyed man clutching a cane for support. His hair was almost entirely gray now, his shoulders hunched as though carrying the weight of the world. For a moment I didn't recognize him. Then he spoke, his voice trembling with vulnerability. "Mia, I need to talk to you." I debated turning him away, but curiosity got the better of me. I gestured for him to sit on the porch, keeping a safe distance between us. He fidgeted awkwardly, avoiding my gaze as he admitted he'd lost everything. His wealth, his reputation, even his health. "I thought about what you said that night," he murmured, referring to my public confession at the gala. "About how I treated you. How I never appreciated you." His admission caught me off guard. Part of me wanted to lash out, to tell him he was too late, that apologies couldn't undo decades of pain. But instead I simply stared at him, feeling nothing but pity. Reg Sterling, the man who once ruled my life with an iron fist, was broken, and I realized I no longer cared enough to gloat. Lila visited me the next day, bringing soup and unsolicited advice. She'd heard about Reg's visit from neighbors. Small towns have a way of spreading gossip faster than wildfire, and wasted no time lecturing me. "You can't forgive him, Mia," she said firmly, stirring sugar into her tea. "Not after everything he put you through. Forgiveness doesn't mean letting him off the hook. It means protecting yourself from his toxicity." Her words echoed in my mind long after she left, though they brought little comfort. That night I lay awake replaying Reg's apology over and over again. Did he really mean it, or was this just another manipulation? Could someone as calculating as Reg truly change? And even if he could, did it matter? What difference would forgiveness make when I had so little time left? Yet, as much as I tried to dismiss his visit as irrelevant, I couldn't shake the nagging sense that unresolved anger might weigh heavier on my soul than any illness ever could. Maybe Lila was right. Forgiveness wasn't about him. It was about me. With my days numbered, I began writing letters. To Caleb, to Lila, to the women at the foundation. Each one carried fragments of wisdom I hoped might guide them after I was gone. To Caleb I wrote about resilience, urging him to keep fighting for justice without letting bitterness consume him. To Lila, I expressed gratitude for her unwavering friendship, acknowledging how much she'd kept me grounded during my darkest moments. But the longest letter was addressed to the future beneficiaries of the foundation, those I'd never meet but whose lives I hoped to touch. "Love is both a gift and a choice," I wrote. "It requires courage to give and humility to receive. Don't let fear or pain convince you otherwise. Remember that scars tell stories, and strength often hides where we least expect it." As I sealed each envelope, tears blurred my vision, but they weren't born of sadness. They were tears of hope, for the lives I'd touched, for the legacy I'd leave behind. Writing these letters felt like tying loose ends, ensuring that my story wouldn't end with regret. On what would be my final night, Reg returned. This time he didn't ask for forgiveness, he begged for it. His hands shook as he clutched mine, his eyes red-rimmed from crying. "I ruined everything," he whispered hoarsely. "My empire, my family. I drove you away because I was too blind to see how much you meant to me." His words hung heavy in the air, raw and unfiltered. For a moment I considered rejecting him outright, letting him carry the burden of guilt alone. But then I remembered something Lila had said. Forgiveness wasn't about absolving others. It was about freeing yourself. So I squeezed his hand gently and nodded. "Reg," I said softly, "you can't fix the past. None of us can. But you can choose how you live with it." He broke down then, sobbing openly like a child. I watched him silently, feeling neither hatred nor love, only peace. When he finally left, I closed my eyes and drifted off, knowing I'd made the right choice. Holding on to anger wouldn't bring me joy in my final hours. Letting go would. I passed away peacefully on a crisp autumn morning, surrounded by those I loved most. Caleb, Lila, and several women from the foundation who called me their mentor. My funeral was held on the grounds of the safe haven I'd built, overlooking the ocean I adored. Dozens of people attended, sharing stories of how I'd changed their lives. Caleb delivered the eulogy, his voice steady despite the tears streaming down his face. "Mia taught me that revenge isn't the answer," he said. "She showed me that true power comes from lifting others up, not tearing them down." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light across the waves, I imagined myself walking along the shoreline one last time. The wind carried whispers of gratitude, laughter, and love, the echoes of a life well lived. Though my journey ended sooner than I'd hoped, I knew I'd left the world better than I'd found it. That was enough. Reg died shortly after me, alone and destitute in a rented apartment far from Cape Cod. News of his passing barely registered. Most people had already forgotten him. Caleb, however, reflected on our complicated history together. While he still resented Reg for abandoning him and his mother, he couldn't help but feel a pang of sorrow for the man who'd spent his final years consumed by regret. "He destroyed himself," Caleb told Lila during a phone call. "But maybe in some small way, Mia helped him find redemption before the end." Lila agreed, though she remained pragmatic. "Redemption doesn't erase consequences," she said. "But it reminds us that everyone deserves a chance to make amends, even if it's too late to change anything." Together they toasted to Mia's memory, honoring the woman who taught them the value of forgiveness and the cost of vengeance. Months later, Lila found one of Mia's letters tucked inside a book she'd borrowed years ago. Addressed to whoever finds this, it contained a simple yet profound message. Pain shapes us, but it doesn't define us. Love should never be taken for granted, nor should it be weaponized. Forgive freely, but never forget your worth. Reading those words, Lila smiled through her tears, reminded once again of the extraordinary woman who'd touched so many lives, including hers. The camera pans out, showing the foundation bustling with activity as women laugh, learn, and heal within its walls. Outside, wildflowers sway gently in the breeze, their vibrant colors a testament to resilience. Though Mia is gone, her spirit lives on in every person she inspired to rise above adversity. And as the waves crash against the shore, the sound carries a quiet promise. Even in sadness there is hope. Even in endings there is legacy.